Disclaimer: The Minority Report podcast by Mike V. Minor. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are mine and mine only and do not reflect those of any affiliated individuals, organizations, or employers. This content is for entertainment and informational purposes only, so listen with an open mind. Every story about Gotham City starts the same way. The city is falling apart. Crime is rising. Institutions are failing. People are scared. And when fear takes over, something always happens. Vigilantes appear, not because the rules stop existing, but because people stop believing the rules were enough. Batman isn't born from peace, he's born from distrust, from the belief that the system moves too slow while harm moves fast. And the villains he faces all believe the same thing, that the world is broken and that they are the ones strong enough to fix it. Gotham isn't a comic book city, it's a pattern. Because in the real world, moral clarity doesn't exist in real time either. In the moment, there is only power, fear, and disagreement. Clarity shows up later, after the damage is done, after the lines are drawn, and after consequences become permanent. And the real question isn't who's right, it's what we allow power to do while we're busy arguing about it. This isn't a show about Gotham. It's a show about the world, using Gotham as a mirror. I go by the name of Mike V. Minor, and this here is episode 10 of the Minority Report. Special thanks to all the support that you guys are giving me just in general. Also for my last episode, truly appreciate that, man. Last episode was a big success, a huge success, man. As usual, don't forget to like, comment, follow, subscribe, share, all that. It's because of you guys that I've had the little share of success that I cherish, and I hope that I can continue this all in the near future. As you guys know, I'm working on releasing each of these episodes segment by segment on podcast sites moving forward. If you didn't know that, I had said that in another podcast, but I am trying to do that. I'll have more info on that once I make it happen, but that is something I'm working on. I'm also looking at going live quite regularly now, but my subjects will be based on these segments, right? So usually when I go live, I join other people's lives. This time I'm talking about doing my own lives, hosting my own lives and everything, having my own panels. And but I'm gonna base it off of people mostly who have watched these episodes. So if you have watched these episodes and you want to get on my live, you're going to get priority over just the average person who just wants to get up there. All right. So I have many other projects I'm working on releasing, right? I got some businesses I'm starting, some that I'm aiming to start this year, and I'll update more on that. And once they're more operational and everything, I'll give you more information. All right. I got new apps coming out. I got new music coming out. I got new stories. The Frequency comic is coming back. I'm not gonna give it a date yet, but it's coming very soon. Also, just so you guys know, I have all my notes and everything for everybody watching the episode. You guys are gonna get this. The people at that watch this on TikTok won't get this, but hey, whatever. Or one of my Christmas presents to myself is I kind of did this up. I have this room in my house that gives me enough space to kind of set up and do this, and it looks super cool. Bro, I look super professional, man. I'm feeling myself right now. Anyways, let's get into these headlines. All right. Every Gotham story has the same tension at its core. Commissioner Gordon represents institutions trying to keep order without lying. The Scarecrow represents something more dangerous: fear, weaponized as control. And that's the real conflict. Underneath today's headlines, not good versus evil, but truth versus fear. So let's start with this terror plot headline, all right? And let's slow it down and talk about what actually happened, not just how it was framed, all right? Authorities announced they disrupted a terror plot in Los Angeles. Suspects were arrested, no attack occurred, no attempt was carried out, and the story went public before any conviction. First, and I want to be very clear, I'm glad harm was prevented. If people were moving toward violence, stopping that is a win. That part isn't controversial. But here's the grown up question we don't like to ask. Once fear enters the room, how far along was this really? Because there's a difference between people talking, people planning, people acquiring materials, and people having actual operational capability. The headline collapsed all of that into one word: terror, and moved on. Commissioner Gordon doesn't ignore danger, but he also doesn't exaggerate it. The Scarecrow, on the other hand, doesn't need explosions. He needs panic, because panic lowers standards. Stopping a plot is good. Turning every disruption into a permanent emergency is not. Here's another question we rarely stop to ask. Our intelligence agencies stop threats all the time. Most of the time, we never hear about it until the case is settled. So why this one? Why announce it immediately? Why frame it publicly as a terror plot before a conviction? Because once fear enters a story, patience disappears. And when fear leads, nuance doesn't survive. Fear makes us feel productive. Truth makes us slow down. Now, here's the part that always makes people uncomfortable. How was the investigation built? Was it informants? Was it surveillance? Online monitoring? Sting operations? Were steps skipped? Were rights tested? Were freedom stretched in the name of speed? That's not an accusation, it's accountability. Outcomes matter, but methods matter too. Did Gordon solve this with Gotham PD, or did Batman drop evidence gathered with tools nobody voted on? Because even when the outcomes feels good, how we get there still counts. Now let's talk about the group chat story, right, with the young Republicans. What was said was disturbing, and it should concern us. And exposure isn't a bad thing, but we still need to draw a line. Now look, hey, I write stories. To do that, I have to think like heroes and villains. And out of context, that could sound crazy. Thinking isn't harmless, but it's not automatically criminal either. These weren't public performances. This wasn't clout chasing. This was formation, ideas being rehearsed in private, and that's why scrutiny matters. We should interrupt dangerous trajectories without pretending every disturbing thought is already in action. Commissioner Gordon watches patterns. The Scarecrow wants us to skip straight to guilt. And here's the part that Gotham always gets wrong: being accused is punishment. Headlines stick, screenshots last. Public judgment is immediate. But when someone is cleared, there's no apology, no restoration, no real accountability. The system moves on, the person doesn't. Fear punishes first, truth takes its time. So when we talk about when Putin says democracy is weak, I don't hear an insult, I hear a test. He's not talking about voting, he's talking about doubt, about how easy it is to turn disagreement into distrust. If fear does the governing for us, nobody needs to rig an election. If you believe democracy collapses under debate, you don't disagree with Putin, you disagree with America. And there's one last thing we almost never do. We're quick to celebrate when something bad is stopped. We debate it, we argue it, but we rarely pause to mourn the fact that someone felt like this was the road they had to take. Not to excuse it, not to justify it, just to ask why. Not all crime is about greed. Some of it is about desperation. Some of it is about believing, rightly or wrongly, that there was no other way. Gangs didn't start as fashion statements, they started as protection. Crime often pays better than doing everything right. That doesn't make it okay, but it should make us honest. Crime will never disappear. There will always be someone who wants more. But if fewer people felt like crime was the only option, we'd be having a very different conversation. Commissioner Gordon isn't perfect, but he understands something crucial. Gotham doesn't collapse from crime, it collapses from panic. Stopping harm is strength, governing through fear is weakness. And the moment fear becomes policy, the Scarecrow wins. And if you really want to talk about how power learns to live off fear, hold on, we'll get back to that, y'all. Yeah. All right, look, so we just talked about how fear gets weaponized at home, how panic lowers standards and punishes before truth. That logic doesn't stop at the border, right? When we normalize it here, we export it abroad. That's global frequency. And to be quick, guys, I don't want you guys to take this the wrong way. I don't want you guys to think that I am sitting here and trying to justify those young Republicans for what they did, or justify or advocate and say that, hey, because they hadn't tried to carry out attack yet and they were just talking about it, that this isn't a subject to worry about. It's absolutely something to worry about. My issue is that I feel like we're quick to judgment. I really feel like we're quick to judgment. And so that is why I'm bringing this up, because I'm trying to bring caution to what we do, right? So anyways, let's get into these global frequencies, all right? When we talk about foreign policy, we like to pretend it's about strategy and numbers, but it's really about philosophy. It's about what you believe people deserve when power is pointed at them. That's why the Batman archetype for this segment is Ra's al Ghul. Ra's doesn't think he's evil, he thinks he's necessary. Ra's al Ghul believes democracy is weak, too slow, too sentimental, too compromised to save itself. His solution isn't reform, it's destruction. Burn the corrupted system down so balance can return. In his mind, that's mercy, and that logic shows up a lot in real world foreign policy. You see it in the strongman thinking. You see it in the idea that chaos can only be stopped by overwhelming force. You see it in the belief that accountability is a luxury, not a requirement. That worldview maps cleanly onto leaders like Vladimir Putin. And it also shows up selectively in how America talks about its own power, too. Take the recent Trump accomplishments tour. All right. Now, let me be clear. This isn't about vibes or personality. This is about results and process. There were security agreements that made sense. There were deterrence moves that allies understood. I'm not anti strength, but strength without precision isn't strength, it's negligence. Cases like the Abrego Garcia type situations expose that problem, where immigration enforcement stops being law enforcement and starts becoming a political weapon or a procedural mess. And here's my stance plain. If we're going to be tough, we also have to be precise, because the state wrecking the wrong person isn't power, it's incompetence. You don't get credit for being aggressive if you don't know who you're hitting or why. That's not order, that's chaos wearing a uniform. All right. And let me also say this too, right? If you know, but you're unwilling to prosecute that in a court of opinion, but yet you give us the information telling us the results, it's stupid. Don't tell us, show us. Okay. Now let's talk about the security agreements and boat strikes, right? I can support intelligence sharing. I can support disrupting criminal networks. I can support deterrence. What I don't support is thin accountability, rising civilian deaths, and a shrug afterward. There's reporting around U.S. strikes on alleged drug boats and increasing death tolls, and this is where Raj Al Ghul logic creeps in. The argument becomes this saves more lives in the long run, but that argument only works after accountability, not before. If we don't know who was targeted, who died, and how decisions were made, and who answers when it goes wrong, then we're not enforcing order, we're guessing with human lives. And if another country did this to us the same way, we wouldn't call it security, we'd call it terror. This is how Gotham gets created. Not because Batman exists, but because institutions stop checking power and start outsourcing morality to force. Gotham doesn't fall because rules are followed too strictly. Gotham falls when power decides it no longer has to explain itself. Ra's al Ghul says, if the system is corrupt, destruction is mercy. My counter is simple. Stability without accountability becomes tyranny. Security agreements are not moral immunity cards. Killing chaos doesn't create justice, and order without restraint always breeds the violence it claims to stop. Foreign policy doesn't need to be weak, but it does need to be answerable, because the moment the state decides it can't be questioned, that's the moment it becomes the villain. We've been talking about power on a world stage, who uses it, how it's justified, and who pays when accountability disappears. But that same logic doesn't live overseas. It shows up at home in quieter ways, and who absorbs pressure and who's insulated from it. Let's talk about all about the Benjamins. So anytime you critique capitalism, people hear socialism. That tells me we stop talking about how capitalism is supposed to work. Capitalism doesn't mean the strongest wins forever. Capitalism only works if money circulates. Tonight isn't about hating success, it's about what happens when success stops moving. This is where Gotham stops being emotional and becomes structural. Let's be honest about how pressure works. At the bottom, the poorest people need jobs and services the most. That are most sensitive to rent hikes, gas spikes, food prices. All right. The middle class looks stable, but it's fragile. One rate hike, one illness, one market shift can wipe them out. And at the top, people are insulated. They don't rely on wages, they move money into assets, stocks, real estate, infrastructure, where it grows and hides. Here's the uncomfortable truth: money mostly flows upward, from the bottom and sideways among the top. That's not envy, that's gravity. Now let's talk homelessness fairly though. In 2016, about 550,000 people were homeless on a given night. By 2024, that number was roughly 770,000. Now, the US population also grew from about 323 million in 2016 to 335 million today. Even adjusting for population, homelessness still increased per capita, and not just in raw numbers. That count also includes new migrants and undocumented immigrants, many of whom arrive with no housing safety net. So if this isn't one cause, it's pressure stacking on pressure. And here's the stat that breaks the narrative: 40 to 60% of people experiencing homelessness are employed. Just in case people want to, call me out and try to say, oh, you don't know where you got that from. I got that from the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness. Okay. That means this isn't laziness, it's affordability. Let's follow the math. In 1985, the median home cost about 3.5 times the median household income. Today, it's closer to 5 times nationwide and far higher in major cities. All right. Nearly one third of households spend more than 30% of income on housing. Almost half of renters are cost burdened. When housing eats the biggest share of income, everything else breaks: savings, health, stability. That's why people with jobs still end up homeless. Now let's talk small business with contrast. Let's take a local Italian restaurant: higher food costs, higher interest rates, leasing instead of owning, fewer tax write offs, thin margins, one bad quarter away from closure. They're not efficient, they're exposed. But now let's take an Olive Garden: bulk purchasing, lower borrowing costs, national advertising, accounting teams to optimize taxes, ability to survive losses in one location. This isn't about evil corporations, it's about structural advantage. When small businesses fail at record rates, that's not creative destruction. That's the middle class losing its ladder upward. This is where Gotham fits. Bruce Wayne funds hospitals, infrastructure, social programs, but Bruce Wayne is also part of the elite system that allow Gotham to decay. That's the tension. And then there's the Penguin. Penguin doesn't just commit crimes, he launders money. He controls supply chains, bribes officials. Some of what he does is illegal, right? But some of it is legal. Some should be illegal, but it isn't. That's modern capitalism's villain: capture, not chaos. Inflation isn't just government overspending, right? Corporations choose how much profit they protect. If a company goes from making $1 profit per unit to 90 cents, why must prices rise if they're still profitable? Especially on necessities: gas, food, housing. When oil and gas companies post record profits during inflation, it's fair to ask, how much profit is enough? This is where people yell socialism. So let's slow it down. If 60% of homeless people are working, then the issue isn't work ethic. If housing eats most of your income, where does your money go? Rent, utilities, transportation? There's nothing left. So when I say people working full time should be able to afford a basic, poor, but stable life, that's not socialism. That's the floor capitalism requires to function. Here's another uncomfortable truth: the loudest critics of universal health care are often people who already have it. Veterans receive government health care, right? They'll tell you it's flawed and they deserve better, but access matters more than perfection. Same with people whose jobs offer private insurance. Universal health care doesn't take that away. Your job can still offer better coverage, just like private schools exist alongside public schools. And for rich people, just because you can afford more doesn't mean others shouldn't afford the basics. Here's a contradiction: we don't complain that too much tax money goes to defense because we feel collectively safe. But when money goes to healthcare, housing, or food, suddenly people worry about who benefits. Universal healthcare works the same way as defense. Everyone benefits from a healthier, more stable society. If we ignore concentration, we don't get freedom, we get instability. And instability always invites authoritarian solutions, not because people want them, but because desperation looks for control. This isn't anti capitalist, it's anti capture. Capitalism needs circulation, democracy needs stability. Gotham isn't poor, Gotham is captured. We just talked about money, pressure, and systems, right? But systems don't feel stress, people do. And the place that pressure shows up first isn't the market, it's the family. So let's talk about family matters. Family matters. And this one's about work, not hustle culture, not grind culture, but burnout culture. Think Alfred versus Bane, not hero versus villain, but caretaker versus pressure. Alfred doesn't save Gotham, he takes care of the person who does. Alfred is the man who stayed after Bruce Wayne's parents were murdered. Alfred didn't chase glory. He didn't demand productivity. He didn't tell a grieving child to toughen up. He provided stability, routine, care. Alfred represents the invisible labor that makes heroism possible. And here's the thing, that kind of support isn't just emotional, the data backs it up. According to a study by the American Psychological Association, nearly 60% of workers report negative stress impacts from work, burnout, low energy, mental fatigue. Now, in the UK 4-day week pilot, researchers found 71% of workers reported lower burnout, 57% drop in employee turnover, and productivity stayed stable or improved. That's not weakness, that's sustainability. Now enter Bane. Bane believes strength comes from suffering. More pressure, more pain, more output. That mentality shows up in our economy too. Just work harder. Just be more ambitious. If you're tired, that's on you. That's not discipline, that's fragility. Here's the reality that no one likes to say out loud. You can't build a society assuming everyone wants to be rich. If everyone chased maximum ambition, if everyone tried to game the tax code, if everyone started a business and everybody tried to avoid being workers, the system collapses. You need people who just want a simple life. Work, go home, raise kids, stay out of trouble. And they shouldn't have to burn themselves out just to exist. Alfred doesn't demand that Bruce save the city every night. He makes sure Bruce survives long enough to try. That's the difference. A society obsessed with Bane breaks people. A society that values Alfred builds stability. Because a society that runs on exhaustion eventually breaks. Family is where pressure shows up first, but it doesn't just stay there. Because when families strain, neighborhoods feel it. And when neighborhoods strain, that's when the system starts breaking. That's why we're going to talk about the village. Let me use a Batman analogy real quick, right? Everybody thinks the real tragedy in Gotham is the Joker. It's not. It's Harvey Dent. Harvey Dent was Gotham's hope. Not a vigilante, not chaos, the system. Courts, rules, institutions, the belief that if you just do things the right way, justice will hold. And then the system fails him. He's betrayed. He's traumatized. And when that faith breaks, justice doesn't disappear, it becomes random. And that line matters here. When people lose faith in systems, morality becomes a coin flip. That's not just Gotham, that's the village. When systems fail quietly, housing, wages, healthcare, education, people don't blame systems, they blame what they can see. And right now, immigration is visible, so it becomes the target. Here's something I noticed, and tell me if you notice this too. When you actually listen to immigrants inside the US, right, you don't hear them say, America ruined my country. We hate America. This is America's fault. I don't hear that online. I don't hear that in interviews. I don't hear that in real conversations. What I hear is our government failed. There was corruption. There was no future. This is all we had left. Even when they acknowledge the US's involvement, they still don't center America as the villain. They talk about the regime, the collapse, the inaction. They talk about the fire, not who sold the matches. Now, to be fair, Americans are feeling real pressure. Housing feels tighter. Schools feel strained. Wages feel stuck. Emergency rooms feel full. That pressure is real. But here's the mistake, people blame what feels immediate, not what's casual. Power destabilizes quietly. Desperation looks loud. So the loud things get blamed. Yes, some immigrants criticize U.S. foreign policy. That's true. But criticism isn't blame. And criticism without power, it doesn't become a narrative. Silence doesn't mean agreement. It usually means survival. And let me be clear about something. This doesn't mean borders don't matter. They do. But border debates shouldn't replace accountability for the policies that actually create instability in the first place. Harvey didn't become evil, he became random. Because when the system failed him, he stopped believing rules matter. And when villagers lose faith in systems, they don't become cruel, they become chaotic. That's how scapegoats are made. And when cities start improvising justice instead of trusting systems, that's how you end up with things like sanctuary cities. We'll talk about that later, right? When people lose faith in systems, they don't stop believing in the right and the wrong. They just stop trusting the rules. And that's where morality certainly takes over. All right, let's talk about these minor issues. We love moral certainty. It feels clean, it feels righteous, it feels like you don't have to second guess yourself. But history tells us something uncomfortable. The most dangerous people weren't confused, they were sure. People love to bring up Jesus flipping tables, and they should, but they get it wrong. That wasn't chaos. That wasn't mob logic. It was symbolic force. It was targeted. And most importantly, it wasn't the removal of power because Jesus disrupted power. He didn't erase structure and he didn't remove accountability. There's a difference between confronting corruption and pretending rules don't matter anymore. Ecclesiastes says something people don't like to sit with. I saw the oppression that takes place under the sun, and power was on the side of the oppressor. The problem isn't power, guys. Power is inevitable. Power is alluring. The problem is unchecked power, and that applies evenly. State, police, protesters, influencer mobs. Unchecked power doesn't care who holds it. That's why Batman is such a perfect mirror for this moment. Batman breaks the law to protect it. His intent is good and his results work. But here's the part we don't like to talk about. Batman doesn't just stop villains, he creates the moral ecosystem they live in. Because the Joker is morally certain too. The Joker thinks he's exposing hypocrisy. Two-Face thinks he's restoring fairness. Scarecrow thinks fear tells the truth. Ra's al Ghul thinks destruction brings balance. Bane thinks suffering creates strength. Every one of them is sure they're right. And Batman proves something dangerous to them. That moral certainty works. Now, let me be clear. That doesn't make Batman wrong, and it doesn't make them right. It makes the situation unstable because when moral certainty gets results, people stop asking who gets checked. That's the real danger. Not chaos, not disagreement. Unchecked power paired with absolute certainty. Because once someone is sure they're right, they stop listening, they stop doubting, they stop being accountable. All right. And you see this in these goddamn lives. You see this when people do these podcasts and everything, when they're absolutely sure that there's no way that they could be wrong. They spew out this stuff, and then there's people who look at that and they start to believe it, and they're like, oh my goodness, maybe they might be on one. They might be on to something. And then they start spewing the same thing. That is the Charlie Kirks. That could be left leaning people too. It could be either side. Intent can explain behavior, but intent doesn't limit damage. Only accountability does. And here's the part history keeps reminding us. There was a time when people were morally certain about slavery. Certain enough to write laws, certain enough to defend it publicly, certain enough to punish anyone who resisted. History doesn't ask whether people meant well, it asks who had power and who checked it. Minor issues are about certainty. How being sure you're right can feel righteous, but when certainty meets power, the stakes change. That's when it stops being a minor issue and it becomes the mother of all bombs, aka the MOAB. One of the biggest lies we tell ourselves is that moral clarity exists in real time. We talk like it does. We argue like it does. We post like it does. But history doesn't work that way. In the moment, there is no moral clarity. There is only power, fear, and disagreement. Clarity shows up later when the damage is already done. And the question we should be asking isn't who's right, it's what we allow power to do while we argue about it. We grow up hearing this phrase, right? Federal law is the supreme law of the land. And people repeat it like it's the end of conversation. But that sentence is incomplete. Federal law is supreme over conflicting state law. It is not supreme over state labor, state resources, or state consent. And that distinction matters because the Constitution was designed with the deep fear in mind. Not chaos, not disagreement, but concentrated power moving faster than correction. Let me be very clear before anyone clips this wrong, right? I am not comparing slavery to immigration. I am comparing how power responds when states refuse to comply. During slavery, enforcement was written into the Constitution. The law required participation, and when northern states resisted the Fugitive Slave Act, they were legally wrong and morally right. That resistance was treated as rebellion in real time. History celebrates it now. And that's the pattern. Resistance is never popular when it happens. It's only honored after we survive it. And here's the uncomfortable part. Today, sanctuary policies aren't illegal rebellion. They are legal non cooperation under the 10th Amendment. And yet they're treated the same way resistance always is, as a sabotage. Back then, resistance broke the law to expose injustice. Today, resistance follows the law to slow overreach. Different legality, same reaction. Sanctuary is not obstruction. Local police are not standing in front of federal agents. They're not blocking arrests. They're saying something much simpler. We will not be deputized. We will not be conscripted. We will not become federal enforcement. That's not defiance. That's a break. And breaks exist for one reason, because mistakes happen faster than corrections. Okay, and I gotta say this again. I know people are gonna try to like take this out of context and make it seem like I am trying to compare slavery to immigration. I'm not. I am talking about state rights, and I am comparing how the state has traditionally resisted federal overreach, okay, or federal mandates that they don't agree with. It's in the Constitution. So, anyways, here's where this stops being theoretical, right? Someone close to me, I'm not going to give you a name, right? But they were arrested during a federal drug sting. All right. Here's the thing that's crazy. She knew nothing about the drugs. She wasn't charged in the end. She wasn't convicted. But she was detained for months without bail because she was labeled a flight risk. That detention caused a visa overstay. That overstay triggered deportation. That deportation triggered a 10-year ban. No conviction, no crime, but permanent consequence. And even when that ban eventually ends, the statistic doesn't. She becomes a deportation number, a success metric, a data point used to justify future enforcement. Context gone, truth erased, narrative locked. And let me also put this out there, right? Before we go any further in this. She knew nothing about the drugs. Not only did she know nothing about the drugs, okay, they said ICE put the hold on her so she couldn't leave. Then, when she got out of jail, they were the ones who gave her the deportation orders, guys. So ICE put a hold on her so that she couldn't leave, right? And said she might be a flight risk. And then after she overstayed her visa, which was because she was held, she was literally captured, they turned around and handed her deportation orders. And then guess what? There was no way for her to appeal it. She had just been locked up for 3 months for something she knew nothing about. And then they turned around and said, yeah, we don't see nothing wrong with you, but you still gotta go. Still gotta go. Do you hear? And once again, I'm gonna say this again. There was no real method for her to appeal. A lot of people don't understand that immigration is run by the executive branch. In the Constitution, the only power that has anything to do with immigration is to Congress, and then that's how they came up with the immigration law. And then the executive branch carries that out and they interpret it how they do, right? You don't even have to believe me. Just Google. What does the Constitution say about immigration? I know the pushback already, y'all. That's one case. How many rightful cases are there? Here's the problem with that logic, though. Justice is not measured by batting average. If you get it right 100 times and wrong once, you stop and ask why the one couldn't be fixed. Because collateral damage is not neutral. At some point, collateral damage has to become unacceptable. Slavery had acceptable collateral damage. The war on terror had acceptable collateral damage. Every bit of that collateral damage was a life, a home, a dream, a cherished belonging, gone and affected forever. And history condemns that logic every freaking time. So, getting back to my Batman analogy, right? This is where Brother Eye comes in. Brother Eye isn't evil because it watches, it's evil because it can't be challenged. It collects data. It keeps forever. All right. It mistakes permanence for safety. And here's a hypocrisy that always makes me laugh. All right. We say we don't trust the federal government. We say we need the Second Amendment as a safeguard. We say power needs limits right up until the government goes after something we don't like. Then suddenly it's trust the system. If you did nothing wrong, you have nothing to fear. Collateral damage happens. We say we need protection from the government right up until the government agrees with us. And that's Brother Eye logic. Safety without restraint. Power without appeal. Now here's a pivot. If we normalize power without breaks inside our borders, we export that logic outside them. And that's where Venezuela enters the picture. Now, I'm going to say this right now before y'all come after me. I'm not defending Nicolas Maduro. He absolutely deserves to stand trial for his alleged crimes and to serve his sentence if he is convicted. But I can still challenge the method. Think about this. If the government breaks the law in an effort to capture or charge a criminal, it can potentially exonerate the evidence collected or the criminal case in its entirety. And that criminal we were trying to stop is then effectively considered innocent even if they are truly guilty. So when the United States conducts a military operation to capture a sitting head of state outside of its borders, whether you agree they were legitimate or illegitimate, whether you agree they were a terrorist, however you want to put it, TikTok language or not, doesn't matter how you want to put it. They are a sitting head of state outside of its U.S. borders and bring them into the U.S. That's not just law enforcement, that's precedent. Who decides guilt internationally? Who enforces it? Who audits the enforcer? If indictments justify invasions, every superpower just learned the rule. Even if the target is guilty, the method becomes the template. And the second their weapons and methods are better than ours, it becomes a weapon at their disposal. We've been here before. When the U.S. dropped nuclear weapons on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the rationale was clear. End the war, save American lives. And in the short term, it worked. But it also introduced an irreversible logic. Peace through annihilation. We didn't just end the war, we taught the world what peace requires. That logic then fueled the arms race, normalized escalation, taught every nation that safety means matching force, even if it brought peace. It also built the world we now fear, and we have to own that. Okay, we can talk about all the times that the U.S. has gone after regime change and it failed in Iraq, in Syria. Now Venezuela, we tried it down there, and we've tried it all throughout South America. All in the Middle East, we've tried this. Okay? It doesn't work. Let's not forget, the U.S. helped build the United Nations. We host it, we fund it, we invoke international law constantly, but then we bypass it when it's inconvenient. Domestically, war powers belong to United States Congress, not the executive alone. And I know they're going to talk about the authorization to use military force, but there's a huge debate about rescinding that because they feel like not just Republican presidents, but Democratic presidents have overused that. If Congress doesn't authorize force, then war powers don't exist. They're ceremonial. And before anyone says that they didn't retaliate, that doesn't erase the fact that we struck first. And precedent doesn't wait for a retaliation. And don't forget, in international law, drugs are not considered a weapon and their distribution is not considered armed conflict or an act of war. Sanctuary slows enforcement. Slowing enforcement prevents permanent harm. Permanent harm destroys trust, and destroyed trust justifies force. Force without rules kills civilians, and the cycle repeats. Which brings me back to the point. The danger isn't disagreement, it's what we allow power to do while we disagree. I don't do this to cause doubt, right? I do this to invoke thought, man. I need you to understand. If you don't agree with me, don't hate me, debate me. All right. As always, though, thanks to everyone. If you like what you saw and you haven't already done so, please like, comment, follow, subscribe, and share. All right. Let me land this right here, guys. Tonight we talked about money. We talked about burnout. We talked about families, about immigration, about fear, about foreign policy. Different segments, same city. In Gotham, everyone thinks the danger is the villains, but the real danger is what the city starts allowing once it decides the rules aren't enough. The poor become collateral damage to systems that need pressure to function, right? Families become collateral damage to productivity models that confuse exhaustion with virtue. Communities become collateral damage when failing institutions look for visible scapegoats. Democracy becomes collateral damage when fear governs faster than patience. And globally, civilians become collateral damage when power decides accountability is optional. That's not fiction, that's a pattern. And here's the part I didn't want buried in the segment, all right? Cities don't experience collateral damage, people do. So let me ask you something, and don't answer it out loud, just to yourself. If the system got it wrong and you were the collateral damage, or if it was your mother, your child, your partner, if it was your mentor, someone you looked up to, someone who helped shape who you are, if it was someone you care for, or someone you care for loves. What if it was your neighbor, someone you argue with, someone you might never get the chance to make peace with, someone you thought you'd have time to fix things with until time ran out? Would you still say, well, the system mostly works? Gotham always tells itself that damage is unfortunate but necessary. That order matters more than correction. That certainty is safer than doubt. And history keeps proving the same thing. Cities don't fall because of chaos, they fall when power decides it no longer has to explain itself. Once again, I go by the name of Mike B. Minor. This was episode 10 of the Minority Report, and the mic has now been dropped.